here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the Scottish musician who was the drummer for Meat Whiplash and also guitarist for the Bicycle Boys and was in Garon. It can only mean one person, Michael Kerr, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. And also, and this is very exciting, the Precious Recordings of London are about to release their John Peel session from the 14th of September 1987. The Motorcycle Boy, 4 tracks. Go to the website on Bandcamp, Precious Recordings of London, and buy a copy basically. So anyway, this is the interview with Michael. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Michael, it's over to you.
Changed them. Well, anyway, so growing up, I was born in 1963, so we're fairly similar ages, you know. So really, again, it was like glam rock was when you first came aware, really, of your own music that you liked. My dad was a big music fan. He liked like the crooners, you know, Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Matt Monro. He liked quite a lot of rock and roll as well. So like Elvis and, you know, Eddie Cochran. People like that. So that was all. There was always music going on in the house, a lot of country and western. And then in the mornings, we used to get ready in the living room before going to school with the Radio 2 was on. Now, Radio 2 played, say I was about 10, so it was about 1973, so that's where you heard some of the hits of the day, you know, but you also heard, there was a lot of easy listening stuff that was on, so you'd hear a lot of Burt Bacharach, and at that age you don't really know what it is, but years later when you hear it again you think, oh, I remember that song when I was growing up.
Yes.
But yeah, it was you know, Sweet Slade, Gary Glitter, David Bowie. The first single I ever bought was Gary Glitter, Life on Mars, I think it was. So I bought that off someone second hand. Yeah. So that was that, and my sister was a big Bowie fan, and then of course everybody sat and watched Top of the Pops on a Thursday.
A Thursday, yes, and we used to listen to the chart show on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Because records used to move rather slowly in those days, didn't they? They'd come in at number 32 and then move up 4 places, and it was, oh my God, 4 places. What will it be next week? You know, we moved at a different pace, didn't we? Yep. It was very different. And it was interesting you mentioned Radio 2, because I remember being in the kitchen with my mum as she used to do all those things, because she used to have I don't know if you remember those days, but there was a twin tub washing machine that was sometimes stuck in the middle of the kitchen, which would vibrate like hell, and pipes and boiling water on cookers, and you know, and you'd be sort of like just noise and boiling water and tongs with, you know, don't touch that.
The big pair of tongs.
The tongs. Yeah. It was like, how, don't put your hand in it, you'll break it. You know, there was a lot of danger every day, and adverts about sort of, you know, freezers in woods that you might crawl into and die.
Yeah.
But easy, yeah. So Radio 2, I remember she used to be there very excited with Jimmy Young in the afternoon with, what's the recipe today, Jimmy? And she'd write these recipes on bits of paper and then put them in the cupboard or in the drawer, which was full of these recipes, and the early work of Delia Smith. But Radio 2, an easy listen. I became obsessed with bands like Burt Bacharach or artists, and the Carpenters were my really go-to band, actually.
Yeah, I mean, like, Karen Carpenter's just got one of the great voices, hasn't she?
Yes, and lyrically, I always say, if you like the Carpenters, you're going to like Joy Division and the Smiths. I mean, there's just no difference in those lines. You know, I say goodbye to love. No one seems to care if I should live or die. I mean, Ian Curtis, Morrissey. You know, it's all there, isn't it?
And Karen Carpenter was tortured, you know, probably just as much, you know, mentally as Ian Curtis was.
Oh God, absolutely. I mean, they could have. Yes, I know, complex people, but amazing songs and so memorable. And decade. And I got to see Bert when he was doing a collaboration with Elvis Costello with an album. Yeah. And they played a few, and it was just like, I just melt when I hear those songs. And there was like those other films, weren't there, that had Raindrops Keep Falling in My Head.
Yeah, that was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I think.
Yeah, I mean, how could we not sort of fall in love with those songs, which was just amazing. So, yes. So did you have any older brothers or sisters that turned you onto music?
My older sister, she liked music, but she was a big Bowie fan, and it was almost exclusively Bowie. that she liked, although she liked some other bands. I had an older brother who didn't really wasn't into music until a bit later on, and a younger brother who was, quite a few years younger than me. So when it came to later in life, when liking music, it came from people I went to school with,
right,
and people I hung about with.
And did football play a big part in your life during those years?
Yeah, football was the main thing, to be honest. I mean, everybody liked music, but it was a council estate in a Scottish new town where, everybody came from the same socio-economic background. There was nobody particularly well off, nobody in complete poverty, nobody had much money, but no complete poverty. So you just got a ball and you used to just kick it about a field somewhere, or some patch of grass or other.
Yes, same here. We were just obsessed with that, putting sticks in the ground, vaguely sticking up woods or some such thing. And yes, pretend to be George Best or whoever, really.
Yeah.
Charlie George. Yes, it was quite... What was your team?
My team is always Celtic.
Right.
I still love football now, so I've got a season ticket at Celtic Park.
And they were the first British team to win the European Cup.
That's right, yeah.
Little Willie, there you go.
That's right.
Actually, if you ever get a chance, there's 2 documentaries on the iPlayer. One about the Scotland team in 74 and then one again in 78. Yeah, I've almost watched both of them twice because they're just so memorable.
Yeah, the 78 one's particularly good.
Well, it was, because I just couldn't believe those guys had to dig a cable to get television to sort of watch the game.
Yeah.
And then there was the people who got a map from the paper and then sort of flew into southern America, and then sort of just went, it's a bit bigger than I expected, and had to hitch all the way down. It was just amazing. It was, Yeah,
you wonder how then, sort of pre-internet days, how did people manage a lot of these travels?
It was you got a book, didn't you? And, bits of paper with little discussion. Yes. So what was your first gig? What was the first gig you went to?
My first gig was, I'll split. So I had 2 groups of friends around about the time you get into music. There was a group of friends that I hang about with in school who were into rock and heavy metal.
Yes.
And then I had another group of friends who actually went to my school, but I didn't hang about with them in school. I hung about with them outside school. And they were the punks.
Right.
So they were into the Sex Pistols, the Clash, Devo, things like that. And the ones at school were into like rock and heavy metal.
Yes.
So, there was almost like, back then you had to pick your tribe.
Totally.
So I ended up being a rocker rather than a punk. Although I always, I heard punk music as much as I heard rock music. So the first band I ever went to see was Rush. That was February 1978, I think.
Right.
So a lot of my first gigs were all heavy metal and rock bands. And then once it must have been, late teens, I then sort of, my musical taste sort of altered.
Yes.
Started to feed into other areas.
Did you, with rock, because as you mentioned, the T word, it was all very tribal, and being in the East Anglian countryside, the status quo with the gods, you never said anything negative about the quo. Were they massive in Scotland as well?
Yeah, in Glasgow. They recorded their live album at the Glasgow Apollo. The Glasgow Apollo is one of those great venues. It's this old Victorian theatre that used to be used as a cinema. It used to be Green's Playhouse, just cinema, but just for punk gigs, rock gigs, there was always an amazing atmosphere, and Status Quo recorded an album. Yeah, but the thing is, I never liked Status Quo, even though I like rock music. I never really liked Status Quo, but yeah, they were a huge band.
Yes, that was Deep Purple and Black Sabbath were mine, and Rainbow. I loved Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, which was a classic. And then it was Motorhead, and then after that, I just thought, well, it's just Motorhead, actually. That's
to be honest, there's a handful of albums that probably I still listen to from back then that I still think are good, but a lot of things when I hear it now, I think, I'm not sure why I ever liked that.
Yes, and I didn't really get into 80s heavy metal at all.
I didn't. Once, I was on, and at the time of the early 80s, I was on to different things, really.
What about people like Nazareth? Did you get into them?
No, you're always aware of them, but I was never a fan.
And did people, because I remember being a little bit traumatised on Todd Pot, seeing people like Alex Harvey on there with Next and Delilah. Was that kind of on your radar?
Again, you were always aware of it. It was that things like Nazareth and Alex Harvey, they tended to be bands that older brothers liked.
Right.
You know, people that were just a little bit older than us.
Yeah, there you go. So when we got to that ripe old age of 16, you would have been 70, that would be 1979.
Yeah.
So, you know, Thatcher just got in power, joyful. But you would have been, were you leaving at school at that stage, or were you going on to A levels?
16, yeah. I left school when I was 17. So, 79, yeah. I think it might have actually been this... the middle of 1980, I left high school.
Right. So you had quite a long period in the early 80s at school.
Just 1980.
Right, you left in right.
June 1980, something like that. That's when I left. Yeah.
So had you got a guitar at this stage?
No. There was never a thought of playing music at that point. It was just about buying records and going to see bands. That's all it ever was at that point.
Yes, and had Alan Horn and Edwin and Orange Juice, had they come onto your radar at that stage?
No, that would have been. Hold on, what? I'm trying to think what year the first Postcard single was released, and again, you were sort of aware of those bands without knowing maybe too much about them. You used to hear the odd Scottish band from and if you listen to John Peel. And there used to be an indie show on Radio Clyde, which was a local Glasgow radio station. They had an indie show, and they used to play stuff like that as well. Yeah, but yeah, you're always aware because people around you, knew them. Some of them would know them, and the other ones were just fans. So you're always aware. And again, one of the things trying to remember is that sometimes when did you first hear? I mean, it's asking when did you first hear the Beatles?
Yes.
Nobody can ever remember because it's always just like they've been omnipresent. And sometimes I think that's the same way, especially Scottish bands, they always just seem to be about.
Yeah, because if you were based in Edinburgh, weren't you?
No, at that point, I didn't move through to Edinburgh till about 1986.
Right.
I was still in East Kilbride at that point.
Right, because during that period, I remember a bit later, probably in a few years, there was that TV program we were glued to from Newcastle, The Tube, wasn't it, with Paula and Jules? And they did a brilliant bit on the Hellfire Club, wasn't it? Which was, I think that was based in Glasgow, wasn't it?
The Hellfire Club was in Glasgow, yeah. I was never in there, but I remember it.
Yes, because there was obviously the Skids who were a little bit older, and then there was Simple Minds, and they were the band that really started to break through and make quite a lot of a blueprint, I suppose, for indie pop. And then I have to say, I thought when I first heard Big Country, they were going to be bigger than anybody else, that first album.
I think it's almost like U2 stole their thunder.
It did. Yeah. I always thought they're much better than U2. They got great songs. So then as we were trundling, because a lot of people often talk about, I mentioned, what bands really influenced you, and they was like the go-betweens, Orange Juice and the Smiths. 83 was when indie pop really started to be a thing, because there was punk and there was post-punk with all that bands like the Gang of Four and Wire and the Nightingales and Public Image. And then obviously there was like the goth scene and Psychobilly, and then you had that Trevor Horn production, which had ABC and people like that. So where were your musical tastes going by sort of the sort of 82, 83 period?
Yeah, I think 82, 83, hold on, I would have been 20. Yeah, I was, really starting to get into indie stuff then. First hearing like the Velvet Underground and the Stooges. Right. And all the band. But again, like the people I was hanging about with, I mean, like, they'd always been like, when the Cure started, they went to see the Cure really early on, and like Echo and the Bunnymen, they were another big band, another band that we all really liked. Yes. And of course, later on, it was a bit later on, Echo and the Bunnymen was the Smiths. I mean, everybody loved the Smiths. I mean, it was at one point, it was just like, became totally, I think the only thing I listened to for about 6 months was the Smiths.
I know. It was like, we have to confess, don't we? It was such a, those lyrics, let's face it, they spoke to us, and musically.
Yeah, exactly. And, and they never felt, like it was, you never felt with Morrissey at that time that it was an act.
No.
That everything he sang, he believed in.
Yes, and then we went, yes, I can. That resonates with me as well.
Yeah.
So there you go. So we were. So then, when does your sort of musical moment start to happen? Did you get to by 85, the mid 80s?
Yeah, but it might be 85, beginning 85 maybe. There was like, because we were all unemployed and really just bored and looking for something to do. And
you do, because there was a lot of indie bands that I've obviously realised when I was saying there's so many indie bands, but the unemployment benefit system and job seekers allowance and enterprise allowance schemes, it did help kind of create this sense of...
Yeah, that's because that was the days before you were made to go along, you know, some job seekers
restart interviews.
Yeah. So we were all bored and we just said, I mean, none of us could play instruments at times, so we decided, we'll start a band. And it was only ever going to be a bedroom band at that point. I was like, Paul McDermott was going to be the singer because he was a good-looking one. Eddy said he would play bass, I would play the drums, and it was Douglas Hart, who was in the Jason Mary chain, was going to play guitar. So we decided that, and fairly quickly, I think we might have had one rehearsal with Douglas. Douglas was asked by Jim and William Reid to go and play bass with the Jason Mary chain, so he left. Then we had a bit of time trying to find another guitarist, and it ended up actually, he was just across the street from me. It was like Steve McLean, who was friends of a friend. Although I knew him, just if passing the street, I would say hello, not because he lived across the street from me. So, and he could play the guitar. So that's how Meat Whiplash were formed.
Right. Were you aware of that early, the Alan McGee kind of thing going on and Jesus and the Mary chain? And
no, I knew about the Pastels because I remember Douglas Hart buying their first single. I remember that. It was only really when the Jesus and Mary chain got hooked up with Alan that we knew about him and knew about Creation Records.
And did that feel like quite an exciting moment?
Yeah, we knew we were sort of riding on their coattails, but it's, from going from something that was just meant to be a bit of a laugh in the bedroom to then playing at the Riot gig at North London Polytechnic, and then at the end of that, Alan McGee coming in and going, look, we're going to do a single. It was madness, really.
Yes, the possibilities. And when did you, because obviously I remember, I was obsessed with the John Peel show, was my go-to thing with my trusty TDK D90 cassettes that I would put in and record.
Yeah.
Because it was just too much to hear, like 90 minutes of new music in one blast. You just couldn't process it, well, I couldn't. So it was always interesting. But there was like the shop assistants coming along on the Subway organisation, weren't they? And getting that single, which was like a 4-track all day long. When did you become aware of the shop assistants?
Yeah, I think it's all a bit a mush together time-wise. But yeah, well, the Meat Whiplash supported the Jason Mary chain at an Edinburgh gig, and the other support band was the shop assistants. But I'm pretty sure that I was aware of the shop assistants before that. In fact, I might have even got their single before that. Because it was definitely that thing, if the indie scene was your thing, you basically bought everything that was coming out.
Yes.
So I was pretty sure I had their single before I'd even seen them or even met them.
Yes.
Because that was the gig that Alex Taylor and Eddy Connelly got together, and they became a couple after that.
Right. My God, the Fleetwood Mac story.
Yes.
Indie romance. Isn't...
I'll tell you a Fleetwood Mac story at one point.
Oh, well, I do love a good Fleetwood Mac story. It's a band that just keeps giving, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad, because there isn't really too much, about that world of indie pop, is there? Because when we were growing up listening to sort of, I don't know if it was the old Grey Whistle Test, but I seem to remember a lot of people being interviewed by Whispering Bob Harris and, these long-haired, guys in the mid-70s and being asked those questions about, being in a band. Well, it's just sex, drugs and rock and roll. And I'm sure somebody down the line said, could you just stop saying that? Because frankly, it was like...
because it very rarely happened. When you're playing upstairs in some pub in Camden in London, things like that just don't happen.
Right. So we remember seeing, interviews with members of Yes or ELP and with their, oh, look, here's my fleet of Rolls Royces. Yeah. It wasn't quite the same, was it, with your indie?
No, it didn't. It was not. Getting travelled about in the back of a transit van.
Yes.
A Fox AC30.
I know.
Wasn't a
Actually,
happy life at that point.
the transit van unloading at 4 a.m. It's rock and roll, isn't it?
Yeah. Sleeping on people's... Whoever was putting the gig on, you would sleep in their floor.
Yes, I know.
Even when we moved out of London, we used to just sleep in Alan McGee's spare room on the floor.
It was good. Did you ever meet Dan Tracy, by the way, from the TV?
Yeah, I met him once. I think I was probably in the same venue as him on a number of occasions, but I have only one recollection of ever talking to him.
Yes, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so because again, they were even before the Pastels, there was the television personalities. Yeah, when I'm thinking back now, yeah, they were really. I mean, way before the Smiths, I think the TV personalities, part-time punks, that was around about the late 70s, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, they were all there, the blueprint of classic music, really.
Because there was them and the Swell Maps that always seemed to had been about for some time.
Yeah, I know, the Swell Maps. Yes, it's there's documentaries to be made on all that band.
Yeah.
Yes, because I suppose by then, had Alan gone to London to start the...
Yeah, Alan. I think Alan must have went to London. I mean, Alan went to London way before Creation was started. He worked for... in fact, when I first met Alan, I'm sure he was working for British Rail at the time.
Right.
I don't know exactly what his job was. I think that him and his wife had both worked for British Rail.
Yeah.
I think once Creation Records took off, and especially the Living Room took off, I think they were making a wee bit of money there that they could buy on.
Nice. Did you ever go to any of the gigs that he put on at the Living Room?
No. The first time we ever met Alan was at the North London Polytechnic gig. I'm pretty sure that was the first time we met him.
Yes. So look, the Bicycle Boy. Oh yeah, how did you get the name?
The Motorcycle Boy?
Did I say the bicycle?
Yeah, the Bicycle Boy. The Motorcycle Boy.
Sorry about that.
We went.
I'll edit that.
We did have a name for the band. And we just said we'll just go with this because we did some sort of Porter Studio demos, and we just at that point we called ourselves the Libertines.
Right.
Yeah, so I wonder what happened if we'd stuck with that name, what the Libertines would have eventually been called. But I think that was really just almost like a working title for name of a band. And then I think Alex and Eddie had been to see Rumblefish at the cinema one afternoon, and we decided on that name.
Oh, my God. Well, we loved, that work of Francis Ford Coppola and Rumblefish and The Outsider and Matt Dillon and those cool cats we just all aspire to. Yes, my God. So that was from that particular film.
Yeah, that's how that came about.
Yes. So when did Alex join the band?
So when Meat Whiplash done the one single with Creation, we did record another one, but it wasn't very good, and Alan wasn't keen on getting it, on releasing it. And there was a bit of there's a bit of fallout between the band and Alan, but there was a wee bit of fallout between one member of the band and Alan.
Right.
And it became obvious that Alan had sort of lost interest in us. And to be honest, I aspired to doing something a wee bit more polished at that time.
Yes.
And Alex, Eddie was going out with Alex, and actually Eddie had moved through to Edinburgh and was living with Alex at the time.
Yes.
And whenever I met him up, he was saying, "Oh, Alex isn't happy in the shop assistants at all. It's not going well." And I goes, "Well, why don't we just start a bit? If she's that unhappy and she's going to leave, why don't we just start a band together?" And that's basically how that came about. And then not long after that, I moved through to Edinburgh because I was going through to Edinburgh a lot at that point to see Eddie, and it ended up that I knew more people in Edinburgh than I did in East Kilbride, so it just seemed a natural thing to do was just to move through to Edinburgh because there was a room going in the flat that Alex and Eddie were in.
Right, my God. Was it one of those kind of, do you feel that was a sense of community in those?
Yeah, definitely was. Yeah. I always felt it was almost like my life began when I moved away from East Kilbride. Because in that house there was Fran Shopler, who was the singer from Jesse Garon. It was her room that I took. She'd moved out.
Right.
Andrew Tully, who was in Jesse Garon and Desperadoes and wrote Capel, was in there, and there was another guy called Stuart Clarke who was in Jesse Garon. So it was all people who were in bands, and if you knew other people who were in shared flats, they were always sharing with other people who were in bands.
My God, that could be a musical, couldn't it now?
Yeah.
I think there was like scenes like that in London, in Squatland. There were a lot of, indie bands, especially people, because there was a lot of bands from Australia and New Zealand that would think, right, we need to go to London. And
I think the Triffids had moved over, hadn't they? I think
and the Go-Betweens
had also as well, yeah.
And then the Chills, I think, had come over. So it was quite interesting. I mean, incredibly adventurous time, actually, just to say, yes, I really believe in what we're doing.
Because obviously, at the time, personally, it was the most important thing in the world, was being in the band.
Yes, it was the only thing that mattered. And was Edinburgh the home of 53rd and 3rd?
Yeah, it was. So there'd been, what was it? Was it Fast Forward? I think it was just Fast was the record label. They'd done like the first Human League single, and they'd done the Fire Engine records, and then that became Sandy McLean worked for them, and then Bob Lass had the label, but I think he gave up the label, and Sandy started running it as a distribution.
Yes.
So I think that's when it became Fast Forward. So, and then he started out, I think it was him and Stephen Pastel started 53rd and a Third.
And was that quite a scene at that stage?
Yeah. In Edinburgh, everybody was in a band, and they were always in more than one band.
Right.
When I moved through to Edinburgh, I actually played with Jesse Garon and Desperadoes for a wee while. Before the Motorcycle Boy, as the Motorcycle Boy was sort of forming and getting its thing together, because they had a support slot on Shop Assistants tour, and two of their guitarists were at university doing exams.
Right.
So they couldn't always make gigs on that tour, so I basically filled in.
Yes.
In fact, the first night of that tour, I was playing guitar, and David Keegan from the Shop Assistants was the other guitarist.
God, it's something of an indie supergroup here, isn't it?
Yeah. Eventually, after the Motorcycle Boy, I joined Jesse Garon full time. But yeah, there was like Margarita. I don't know if you know that there's Saskia Hollings, sorry. She's just written a book called You and Me Against the World. It's just been released.
Yes, I interviewed her because she did an interview book on another subject of a female band somewhere.
That's right, she did. So she did this new book. It focuses on Alex Taylor and Margarita Fasquez Ponte, the magnificently named Margarita, and just because Margarita had been in Jesse Garon, Rote Capel, the Shop Assistants, and the Fist Bombs. So she'd been in 4 bands. Alex had been in Rote Capel for a little while,
right?
Recording with them. Then obviously the Shop Assistants, and then the Motorcycle Boy.
Because I did an interview with Marguerite, and I think she was also appeared on one of those 4AD records, didn't she? Which became a kind of a classic kind of song, a bit like with the Copto Twins.
Or this Mortal Coil.
Well, one of those kind of. I think there was a collection. I think it's but. As you can tell, my brain is a bit scrambled with all these artists that you mentioned, but they were very prolific and doing kind of really memorable stuff. And I think she was on one of those collections doing a song. But and just on that point, the Copto Twins, when they came along, I was obsessed and got Treasure and just adored them. It was different, wasn't it?
It was. That was the thing about them was that, you can. They never sounded like they came from one particular place or one particular time.
Yeah, and it was just unique. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Her voice is like. Well, there's a couple of other singers sort of sound a little bit like her, but not in the way she does.
No, the sound. It was very kind of different and radical, and it was just very. Like we'd got that moment where things like Everything But the Girl, then the Copto Twins appeared, and. I suppose a few years later was Michelle Shock did an album, Short Sharp Shocked, and then various other bits. And it was just, anything like you said, it was in the indie charts. You just went out and
and if you didn't buy it, then you'd hear it on John Peel probably anyway.
Yeah, and then we obviously all loved the Bundy Boys, so it always goes back. I just love that. I think that Bundy Boys album, Shabini, wasn't that a label that was in Scotland? Some guys from Scotland.
I'm not
completely off track here.
Yeah, I don't. What year was that released?
Yes, this is a good one. This is quality Bundy Boys. I'm going to go for it's like Mike Reid pop quiz now, isn't it? I'm going to go for 86.
Yeah, so that
could
might
be.
be.
Oh, actually, they, interestingly enough.
Is that maybe the label that the Finney Tribe had started up?
Oh, the Finney Tribe, because they did that. Oh, what was that one with those amazing bells on?
Oh, I can't remember, but I remember that they had their own studio. They were way ahead of everybody in the fact that they had their own studio. I remember going to visit their studio, but they also had the record label, so I was maybe on that.
So there was something called Shed Studios, and I thought they actually went and lived in Scotland for a while when they came over. So I think that it was about 86 they started to become quite well known with John Peel and then Kershaw. And then I think they went on to Warner Music. And I think they even supported Madonna at one of her tours. But yes, I think it was there was a Scottish connection of them coming over and probably thinking, yes, I want to move to Scotland. I like the clouds. Anyway, who knows? I don't know. Where were we? Yes. Jesus, that was Chris. Oh, did you meet Chris Connelly at this stage?
No, at least I don't think the time I met Finney Tribe a couple of times, and I don't think he was there when I met them.
Yes. So then, yes. So you were living rock and roll 24/7, weren't you?
Well, I wouldn't say rock and roll 24/7. Maybe just music 24/7.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
You know, the frustrated indie rock star in the bedroom.
Yeah.
Yes, sitting on a pile of NMEs.
Yeah.
And yeah. So then, so you recorded something for Creation Records, did you? Like a demo for them?
No, but we record. So after the North London Polytechnic gig, Meat Whiplash, Alan McGee came in. We'll do a single, and I think it was a couple of months later. It wasn't that long before we were down in London recording that. And after that, it took a while to get released because I think he'd after the G's and Mary Chain became quite a big success. He'd quite a bit that sold a lot of records. He'd quite a lot of money, so he was doing quite a lot of records. So I think that was about October 1985.
Right,
85 that came out, yeah. So this, and that sold well for an indie single. That sold quite well.
Brilliant. What was that particular track? Because on your Discogs,
Don't Slip Up.
Don't Slip Up. I was bizarrely not there actually.
It should be on. It's definitely on Discogs because it was re-released. There's a label that does some indie single reissues. Is it Optic Nerve? I think they're called.
Oh yeah, the Optic. Yes, he's gone a bit bad, the Optic Nerve business.
Oh, is it? Anyway, so he re-released Don't Slip Up a few, again, that was probably pre-COVID, I think it was.
Right. Motorcycle Boy. Yeah, Don't Slip Up.
Yeah, Meat Whiplash, Don't Slip Up.
Oh, it was a double, was it?
Well, Alan said, it wasn't really, it was just, but Alan goes, oh, we'll make it a double A side. I think just because Creation had never had a double A side.
Right, and that was that one.
Yeah.
And then after that kind of relationship went south, what happens with the band? Are you all still based in Edinburgh at this stage?
No, it was just me and so it was sort of just dead, and the band was fizzling out, and then basically we never came. I don't think we ever said, right, that's it. Everybody just knew it had fizzled out, and then I moved through to Edinburgh with the intention of sort of forming the Motorcycle Boy with Eddy. And Paul McDermott, who was the singer in Meat Whiplash, he moved through to Edinburgh eventually to be the drummer with the Motorcycle Boy.
Right. Oh, got you. So you were sort of swinging from the Meat Whiplash to
the Motorcycle Boy, yeah.
Ah, it all makes sense now. Yeah. And then once you became a unit, did you get quite a lot of interest from record labels at this stage?
Well, we were down now. Alex her contract was with basically the shop assistants had signed with a subsidiary of Chrysalis Records, and so we went when she left the Motorcycle Boy. I think the Chrysalis part of their contract was they had first choice on anything that any of the band members wanted to do, side projects, splinter projects, or whatever. So we were down, and it was Jeff Traffus was in charge of Blue Guitar, which was the Chrysalis subsidiary.
Right.
So one day me, Alex, and Eddy were down in London. Had gone down because Jeff Traffus had wanted to speak to us, and we were in the offices. And then as we came out, there was two other guys that went in. Turned out they were the Mighty Lemon Drops managers.
Right.
So they were asking, well, why was Alex in? And they explained the situation for us to them, and so they wanted to manage us. So they renegotiated this Alex's deal, because it wasn't going to be a huge amount of money. So they renegotiated that for us. So it was like, almost like Chrysalis were signing a new band. So there wasn't really any interest, because the interest was already there.
Right.
The Motorcycle Boys' first single was released on Rough Trade, although we were never actually signed to Rough Trade. All the money was put up for that single was put up by Chrysalis, but they felt it would be better from us coming from Meat Whiplash and Alex come from the Shop Assistants, that our first single, Motorcycle Boys' first single, should be released on an indie label, because you would obviously get the attentions that it would go into the indie charts.
Yes.
You would get played on John Peel because it was an indie single. Although Big Rock Candy Mountain got, which was unusual at that time for an indie single, got quite a lot of Radio 1 daytime airplay.
Yeah, that was amazing.
I know that was always really strange. You'd turn on the radio and Simon Bates was playing your record, which is really, really odd.
That was probably not with our tune though.
No, no, maybe one day.
One day, yes, I know. Oh, he was so. What was it? Just going back, what was it like? Because were you supporting Jesus and the Mary Chain at the famous riot?
For Meat Whiplash, yeah. I mean, we supported Jesus Mary Chain a lot at that time, because they were our friends. They were from East Kilbride. In fact, the very first time that Jim Reid had ever performed was at a house party in East Kilbride, and Eddy Connelly, who was in Meat Whiplash, was one of the 3 or 4 people that played with him that night. So, and one of the guys that we'd gone to school with, Stuart Clarke, was Jim Reid's best friend. So we used to hang about a lot. You just, when you've got no money and whatever, you used to just walk about the streets.
Yes, well, absolutely.
And you talk about music or whatever. So, I mean, I didn't know William that well, but I knew Jim from just walking about. And
what was the atmosphere like at a gig that sort of kicks off?
Yeah, well. So we'd played them before, yeah. Yeah, we played the Glasgow gig with them before. That was quite small, so this was the biggest gig. And I mean, so Meat Whiplash went on stage, and there was lots of people spitting and whatever, a bit of abuse, which is fine. And so I think Steve McLean, who was a guitarist, got a bit fed up with it and picked up an empty bottle. Now, the story is that he chucked it at the crowd, which is partly true and not completely true. He threw it into the crowd where he knew there would be a gap. He wasn't aiming at anybody and just shouted, "Catch!" And then the atmosphere was a wee bit sour at that, even before then, but it got bad after that, because suddenly 2 guys jumped up on stage and started to fight with Stephen McLean. Eddy got a punch. Remember, Paul McDermott ran off stage. I was sitting behind the drums just thinking, what the hell's going on? Eddy tried to stop the guy getting to Paul McDermott, and he got a punch. Meanwhile, I looked over the other side of the stage, and there's Stephen McLean fighting with this other guy, managed to punch him off the stage. Then the other guy that punched Eddy came over, and Stephen McLean managed to get him off stage. So then, of course, everybody just left the stage at that point. And then it was Alan McGee that just goes, look, just go back on stage and make a noise for 10 minutes. Don't even play a song, just play a noise, which we did. There's actually a recording of that somewhere I heard years and years ago, because Alan McGee wanted to get the crowd riled up. Right. And so it was a good start. So at the end of that gig, it was just nuts, because we were in a dressing room downstairs. It was a university gig, and the security was basically the Students' Union, who obviously were incapable of controlling something like that. So we're downstairs listening to this noise upstairs, and then we went out after it all calmed down. There was just the PA had just been ripped to shreds. But yeah, it wasn't. And actually, after Meat Whiplash went off stage, we actually all went out to the bar, or 3 of us went out to the bar. At the back of the venue, and the 2 guys that had jumped up on stage came up to speak to us, and by the end of the night we were all best pals. Oh, well, there you go. I think their thing was to go to gigs and see if they could cause trouble, and I think it was the first time that they'd ever actually got a band fighting back with them, so I think it made their night.
Oh, blimey. God, it's a long way from a highly... Yeah, Beyonce, wasn't it? Or
Yeah.
it was like...
So I was at the next Mary Chain gig. We didn't play it, but we were down doing press interviews. Meat Whiplash, it was the Electric Ballroom, and that was really, really nasty. You could sense it right from the off that people were there not to see the band, but just to kick off. And actually, the Jason Mary Chain had got 2 security guys in that night in case anything did kick off, and it did. And one of the security guys, who was ex-SAS, walked out. He said, "I'm just taking this," because he'd got a big cut in his head. So that was, I think, Jason Mary Chain after that decided they wouldn't play in Britain for a wee while.
Blimey. It's kind of weird, isn't it, that kind of sense of violence?
Yeah, I know. But yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. Violence has always slightly boggled me. I fear pain, I suppose.
I know. Is that? Yeah, I've always been a wee bit of a coward, so
yeah, no, I thought it's like
try to shy away from that if I can.
Yes, it's like, blimey, if you want to win, you can win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, gee, God. So that was the Meat Whiplash moments. God, that's amazing, actually. So so the single comes out on Rough Trade. At that stage, did you think you were going to keep with Rough Trade at that point?
No, we knew it was Chrysalis through Blue Guitar that had putting up the money, and our contract was signed with Chrysalis in the Chrysalis offices, so we knew that. We knew it was only the intention was that we'd only do that first single, get a bit of attention, and then just take it from there.
Yes. And with that single, you recorded with the famous Pat Collier, didn't you?
Yeah, that was first. The first time we ever met Pat was the first day we were in the studio. I think we got 4 days of recording to do that, and the 2 songs for the B-sides.
Yeah.
And that's the first time we met Pat. And Pat, he was just so nice. He really was just a lovely man.
Yeah.
Really quite laid back.
So with that year, that was 87, which I still think is one of the best years of music.
Yeah, 86. Yeah. 86.
And then you got your John Peel session as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I think at that point it was like, I remember we'd done a John Peel session with Meat Whiplash. So we and Alex had done one with the shop assistant. So we knew, so it wasn't. I remember getting the first time we got, oh my God, we're doing a John Peel session. Can you believe this? Second time, it's still quite a big thing, but not to the extent it was the first time round.
Yes.
Yeah, but
absolutely.
we knew because I remember even Morrissey talking about this, that, going in, the Maida studios are amazing. I mean, as good a studio as you'll ever probably be in. But the staff were really disinterested. They didn't want. I mean, you get was it?
It was Dale Griffin.
Dale Griffin, who'd been obviously in Mott the Hoople.
Yes.
Now, as I said, that would be such someone in Mott Hoople are doing this session. But back then, when you're a young whippersnapper with a bit of an attitude, that didn't really matter who it was. And the Meat Whiplash one hadn't gone particularly well between the band and the studio staff. Like I say, they were used to had been, because usually the way it seemed to me was the people who were in recording and engineering BBC sessions for the radio were basically producers and engineers that weren't as popular as the ones were.
Yes.
One way. So there was a little bit of bitterness there, I think, that they were doing these bands who couldn't really play their instruments that well, because the engineer or the producer, anyway, for the Meat Whiplash one, kept on telling us, I've recorded Queen, don't you know?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was the level of musicianship he was used to, and professionalism probably he was used to. And then they were doing these radio sessions, and let's say I've had a few people saying they're not really that enjoyable an experience to make.
Yeah, I think 80-90% of people, found it. They loved the sound. I think they got a great sound, and the engineers and whoever managed to create some, but quite grumpy, and most people didn't get on with Dale. So it's just one of those things, isn't it? Really, I guess it must be tricky because they must be thinking. I think I've noticed that you probably every 5 years you get a sort of a bit of a new chapter in music, don't you? And for people who are even punks didn't sort of go into indie pop. They found it all a bit, what the hell's this rubbish, you know?
Yeah.
Music's all over it by 82, 83 for them, you know. And
Yeah,
it was,
exactly.
they were just going to stay with that and go backwards. You know, they weren't going to start thinking, oh, yeah, Morrissey, isn't he great? Or, oh, I really like the work of Prince. It was like, oh, God, what are they, you know, this is all this phase stuff going on. So, I don't know. We can easily suddenly sound quite dated, old, can't we?
Oh, I know. Yeah, that happens very quickly. I mean, a lot of those guys they were punks in the 70s. They'd come all from, they'd all been listening to rock during the 70s.
Yes.
You know, I mean, later on they would admit to that. They didn't at the time, you know, but I mean, they might have listened to the Stooges and whatever, you know, but in the Velvet Underground, but, you know, they'll probably listen to Free and Bad Company as well.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised one night many years ago watching I think BBC, like punk at the BBC or something, I don't know. It was like on Top of the Pops. And I just was a bit shocked by all the backing band looking like old, like you mentioned, the old rockers.
Yeah.
With somebody who was a bit more thin and, you know, punky at the front. But they all looked like, oh, well, we were just playing steady rock bands you know, and now we just got now I'm the bass player in this punk band. And you could tell they weren't quite punk.
Yeah.
It was kind of like quite... And actually the music sounded quite laboured as well. I was thinking, oh, this isn't at all exciting. You know, halfway through hearing Sham 69 doing The Kids Are All Right or whatever, United.
Yeah.
This is really dull. There's only so much time you can hear that. So, yes. So once the single came out, was it all engines go for the album?
Well, we didn't have a huge amount of songs when we did that first single, and then we were asked to do another single. This was going to be through Chrysalis, Blue Guitar, and having had a bit of success with Big Rock Candy Mountain, we thought, oh, we'll get a named producer in to do this one, and I really liked a lot of the stuff Flood had done. You know,
yes.
Well, like Nick Cave and Erasure. So he agreed to do the single. But anytime I'd ever been recording in a recording studio, the band were always very involved in the recording process. You know, we were always part of the decision making. But with Flood, you just went in one at a time and did your thing, and then you were back out in the sort of rest area, whatever it was. So we never really ever felt that involved in that. And, you know, the single hadn't turned out that great, and none of us were happy with it. And we asked the record label if they wouldn't release it. We actually went back into Greenhouse Studios with Pat and actually just added a couple of things to it, and he remixed it, and it was better, but it still wasn't that great. In fact, we did 3 songs for the B-sides, I think, with Pat at Greenhouse Studios. And I think we worked so well with Pat, that's why we decided that when it did come to do the album, we'd use Pat.
Right. And then what studio did you use for the album?
Pat used to have Alaska Studios down at Waterloo, where a lot of the early Creation singles were done. Upside Down with Easy Chain was recorded there. Don't Slip Up was recorded there. But then he'd a big, it was like 2 studios had in this building up in Old Street. It was really, really nice studio. So that's where we recorded it. In fact, we recorded Big Rock Candy Mountain in the smaller studio downstairs, but we recorded the Scarlet album upstairs.
Right. So with that particular, when you came to do that, which was, I think, the following year, wasn't it? 80?
Yeah, it would be, because it was towards, I think it was almost a year. I actually got to the point where the record label goes, look, it's coming for a year and we haven't had an album out yet. You really need to go into the studio to record the album. So that's why that was booked. So we did 3 weeks for recording, then a week for mixing, and anything else that I needed added to it.
And how did you work as a band? Did you all come together with ideas, or
Well, at the beginning it was me. I would come up with some sort of chord progressions and song structure, and I'd give them to Alex, and Alex would add some vocals to them. That was right at the very beginning, when it was just basically me, Alex, and Eddie, and maybe Paul a wee bit at that point. But we got another guitarist in, David Eastaugh, who was a student, is from Belfast, but was a student at Edinburgh at the time, was looking for a band to join, so we got him in. So once I had done what I had to do, I gave it to Alex, then David would get it and he would add some guitar parts for it. And that's what it was for quite a wee while, and then Eddy started writing as well again. But the process was always music first, give it to Alex, and then give it to David, and he'll work around what Alex has done.
Right. And did you have Anthony Cooper as well?
Yeah, Anthony. Well, with Paul, who'd been in the Motorcycle Boy, and then it didn't work, and then drummed for Meat Whiplash. It didn't work out with him, and unfortunately, we had to let him go, which was horrible for him, especially. And Spencer, I'd known him since me and Eddie had known him since we were 14, so that was quite a tough one. And then Anthony Cooper came in, and he was a bit younger than us, but he'd been a drummer in some bands. We did get another guy in who'd been in some. Actually, had been on a band who'd record the Pratts, they were called. They recorded a single with Rough Trade, really early 80s. But he only lasted a wee while, and then Anthony Cooper was recommended to us. So, although at that point he wasn't really a full-time member of the band, he was our drummer, and he drummed on the album and in the gigs about that time.
Yes, and then you got. Did you have it all demoed and rehearsed, and then went into the studio?
No, the only time we ever really did demos was right at the beginning. And I think that was Rough Trade that paid for it. We went into a studio in Edinburgh and did some demos. That was the only time we did demos. We'd always rehearse them.
Yes. And was was that recording process for Scarlet, was that a good time for the band?
Yeah, it was great. So about a couple of weeks before we went in to record it, Pat had come up to Edinburgh for a couple of days, and we'd booked this rehearsal studio, and we just went through all the songs, sort of refining them. He was making notes. So we went in to actually record the album. There was no arguments. It flowed really well. I think there was only one song that was difficult to record, and the rest, just seemed to fall into place.
Oh, which was the difficult one?
It was Some Girls.
Right.
It's one of the ones that it was like, I think, and Pat always said that, he goes, every album he's ever produced, there's always one song that's a bit of a problem.
Right.
Just didn't seem to get right. And it might have been better if we just not scrapped the song, but scrapped the way we were doing it and maybe rearranged it. But anyway, so, you've only got a certain amount of time to do these things.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it does sound amazing. It's just such a great sound the band created at that point. Were you feeling, or were you starting to become aware? I mean, it's a bit different at the time, but I did notice that by 87, the glory years of indie pop were starting to, a lot of bands were starting to struggle to keep going in a way. And then there was that kind of moment where, the Smiths broke up and then Ecstasy appeared, and then there was a little bit of the next Primitives album, or the Darling Buds, or the Mighty Lemon Drops. It was almost like actually those years have gone. And
you did. You could definitely feel that. You could feel that the record companies, attention was shifting away from bands like ours. Because they've obviously got to find where the next dollar is.
Yes.
It's going to be some other form of music.
And where did the cover come from the album?
Well, okay, so I'll go back. So there was, when I'll have to explain some bit of the history of the band at this point. So we recorded the album, and we got the name of it and whatever, and there'd been some suggestion for album covers. Then out of the blue, Alex and Eddie, I got a phone call to say they were sacking David, the other guitarist. And me and David become really good friends while we were in the band.
Was that David Scott?
David Scott, yeah. And I was quite taken aback by this, and didn't feel it was. And I never, to this day, we neither him nor I know why he was sacked. Anyway, cut long story short, I left in solidarity. Alex and Eddie moved to London, where they thought the album was going to be released. Then I think the record label threw a bit of money at them to re-record stuff, but then everything was just scrapped. They wouldn't release the album, whatever. So I'd lost contact with David for 20 years, I think it was. He moved to America, and but I met back up with him, and we said, it was a pity that album was never released. Should really maybe try and track down the master tape. So I went on a quest to track down the master tapes, which was quite difficult, because I contacted Pat Colley. He just goes, like, when the tapes are finished, I just send them to the record company. Now, Chrysalis didn't exist at that point anymore.
Right.
I contacted Jeff Travis. Jeff didn't know where they were. I'd contacted other people that, because it might have been the British Music Group, BMG, that had taken over Chrysalis or Warner Brothers. And anyway, so I kept on sending people emails. I either never got a response, or if I did get a response, nobody knew where the master tapes were. So one night I was watching the Cherry Red channel on YouTube, and I started watching this video only because the guy in it he wasn't born blind, but he'd become blind, and had managed to stay, continue doing his job. And I was fascinated just by how somebody like that, such a thing had happened, had managed to carry on his life.
Was he a producer?
No, he was just a record company guy. So he was from Blue Raincoat Music. And so all of a sudden he just mentioned, so the guy asked him, what does he do? And he goes, well, I look after the Chrysalis back catalogue. Oh, okay. So I immediately Googled Blue Raincoat Music, got an email, and then so immediately emailed them saying, do they have the master tapes? So almost, within a day or two, I got an email back from somebody saying, funnily enough, that he'd been looking at the Motorcycle Boys stuff just the day before. It was in relation to the shop assistants. And so I said, look, I would really like to license the album, but I've never been through this process before. I had no idea how much money it was going to cost. Me and David had decided that, if it was reasonable, then we would just half the cost of everything and get it done. Yes. So they said it goes, we'll get back to you. It was £1,000 to license it for a 3-year license. And I thought, that's fine. That's how much I was hoping it would be. So anyway, so fast forward. So we're going to do the album. And there wasn't a huge amount of budget, if any, for an album cover. And I was just Google. I can't remember what I put in Google to see if I could get any thoughts on an album cover. And then that image came up. It was by Norman Parkinson. So there was, I can't remember the name of the photo library that had the rights to it. So I contacted them and asked them how much it would be to license it for an album cover. And it was like thousands of pounds. I think it was £3,000, which we didn't have. But it just seemed to fit so well, that image. So I acted dumb and just acted as if I was the manager of this band. They're a young band. They're really, really keen on using it, but there's no budget for the thing. So he goes, £1,000. We'll do it for £1,000. And I just emailed back saying, that's still too much. He goes, well, how much have you got? I just goes, okay, I'll just tell him we'll get £500 for it. And he goes, that's fine. So £500. But it's a beautiful image.
Yes, God, I did not know. So you did the album, you split.
Yeah.
And the album just doesn't...
Just sat on a shelf for years, wherever all the Chrysalis stuff was.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
There you go. And did you ever have any more communications with Eddy or Alex?
Well, Alex, not with Alex. Last time I seen Alex, I think Ride had just signed to Creation, and I was down in London, I think, with Jesse Garon and Desperadoes, and Ride were doing a showcase gig. Almost an announcement by Creation. So we went along to that, and that's the last time I ever talked to Alex. But that would have been early 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say 2, 3. Yeah,
I'd seen Eddy a few times after that. He managed Adorable, who were signed to Creation, and they stayed at our house when they were up in Scotland. And the last time I saw him was a few years ago, again before COVID, when his dad died, and he was over for the funeral, and him and Paul McDermott met up. But of course, Alex has passed away now, and so has Eddy.
Yes.
But nobody had really... Last time anybody I know had contact with Alex was 2003, when Alex walked into the record shop that Andrew Tully from Jesse Garon was working in, and they went out for dinner that night. And that's the last of anybody I know having contact with her. But of course, found out her husband... When the Motorcycle Boy album was released, her husband contacted me to say that Alex had passed away in 2005. So it was like 15 years she'd been dead before anybody really knew about it.
God, that must have been a really hard one to process.
Yeah, it was. That came. To be honest, it was maybe surprisingly unsurprising, because I'd even said that Kevin Buckle, who had owned Avalanche Records, I'd been talking to him about it. He gave us quite a lot of advice on releasing the album. And I'd said, because nowadays with the internet, it's easy to track down people. And I was just completely on it, because I tried to get in contact with Alec, find her, to let her know me and David were going to release the album. And I just couldn't. And I did say that to, Kevin Buckle. It might be that Alex isn't here anymore. And it turned out to be true.
Jesus. Oh, my God. I mean, but that is still not to have one person.
I know. So, because you always think, and especially when the album has been released, you think, oh, I'll see them again and we can talk about the good times and the not so good times. Just even if it's just one last time, just remember where you were when you last saw them.
Yeah. I know. Well, I think that's kind of important-ish, ish, but I'm terribly liberal, aren't I? But, that kind of feeling of closure, even if you just want to say, look, I'm really sorry, I didn't act brilliant. I didn't act brilliantly. I wasn't at my best. I can't remember what I said, but I could have been a jerk at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. So that was famous because when Eddie died just over a year ago, he was still living in America at that time. Because I'd known Eddie. If anybody ever go, who's your best friend? I would have said it was Eddy Connelly, even though we really didn't see each other anymore. My best friend was still Eddy Connelly. So when he died, that was a sore one. And I got quite melancholy and introspective looking. So, So I ended up with, I thought, well, when was the last time I saw Eddie? I remember when I saw Eddie. Goes, but then what if these other people that I know, what if they find out they died? I wouldn't even remember when the last time I spoke to them. So the good thing over the past couple of years is that I've met up with a lot of people I hadn't seen for a long, long time.
Yes, well, there's a bit more, I suppose, with all these reissues and compilations and books and films, it's given people a little bit of a chance to take a moment. It's kind of like it's there now, isn't it?
Yes,
It's like, the door, like I was saying earlier, that whole indie pop scene from the 80s, no one was interested for decades, and it's only been very recently, really, when, as I said, all the books and memoirs and films and exhibitions and documentaries, and you think, oh yeah, it's like those stories. Because I think the stories of the 80s was often told by the media, the main media, which was all, New Romantic, Spandau Ballet, Trevor Horn, Frankie, Live Aid. But then you went, oh yeah, but there was all this 80s underneath.
Yeah, it's like that. I don't know if you know that Sam Nee, who did that book, the scene in between, and it is those scenes in between, isn't it? Those scenes in between are usually the ones that have got the best stories.
The best stories and the best soundtrack. I mean, I think sometimes, and that's what I've really enjoyed with doing this, is that I missed a lot of the music first time because you just couldn't get to either hear it or buy it or whatever. It just was there and it went. And then I've gone back and listened to the music that I missed, really, and was just like, God, this is brilliant. But at the time, you just get what you can with your budget, but you couldn't go, I'll just quickly stream something and have a listen,
It's that you were always chasing music, weren't you, to a certain extent? The fact that it came at you that fast, and like you say, you had limited funds to buy stuff. Back then, the only way you could buy it was actually a physical copy. So if you didn't buy it, you generally didn't hear it.
And it wasn't always successful going into a record shop asking for a record that you just heard on John Peel, being met with this blank face. But I did get the shop assistants all day long, which I was very pleased with. So when you'd left the band with Solidarity, which was obviously we loved in the 80s, what then happens with your musical moment next?
So after that, I joined Jesse Garon and the Desperadoes, who I'd played with live in the past. Because they were forever going through guitarists and never had guitarists would stay for a while and go. So I joined Jesse Garon and Desperadoes, and I recorded an album with them called Nixon. And then eventually they split up, as bands of that size and stature tend to do.
Right. Did they do a reference to the IRA bombing?
Well, there's funny enough, because Norman Tebbit recently, died the other day.
Oh, yes.
There was a song called The Grand Hotel, but I'll not explain it by his behalf, but it's not particularly in support of the IRA.
No.
Although some people think it is, yeah.
Yes.
I think Andrew wishes maybe he'd been more explicit in the lyrics, so there wasn't any dubiety in what was the intent.
Yes, I know. It's yes, very emotive.
No,
And that
Andrew Tully's you should interview Andrew Tully.
Oh, I've been trying for a long time.
Oh, have you?
He sort of says okay, and then I'll go brilliant, and then I don't hear anything.
Yeah, next time I see him, I'll have a word in his ear.
Yes, Mr. Tully.
Yeah,
I know. I done like Margarita, which was nice. Yeah, but that was the only one. So then the 90s appear, and by then, yes, music was changing quite radically because we had the grunge period, didn't we?
Yeah.
And a bit of that. And ecstasy, I mean, dance music was starting to really raise its head. And
then that, of course, there was that indie dance crossover that
yeah, because you had the Soup Dragons, obviously did really well.
Primal Scream.
And Happy Mondays and Stone Roses, and suddenly Ecstasy, and the 90s, the John Major years that we now go, God, they were much better than I can remember. Yes, they were kind of musically, things really shifted. So did you then, for your 90s, what did you do? Did you do anything musical in that period?
No, sort of real life sort of took over at that point. So I got married in the 90s. No, hold on, what year did I get married? 1991 I get married.
Right.
And then my daughter was born in 95. So I after giving up music, I actually became a photographer. I worked as a photographer for about 10 years.
Right.
I'd started as a hobby. I got a camera, I was in the bands, and it started off as a hobby. And then I went to college and studied photography for a couple of years and did that for...
Fantastic. So do you have great images of little indie gigs?
No, I don't, to be honest. I think, especially back then, there was so many flat moves and house moves that just things got lost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just...
It's a shame, yeah. Or you just think, oh, I'll fling them out. I've not got room for them. So a lot of things that disappeared that I wish I had now.
Yes.
Even like records, even bits of vinyl, you think, what? I used to have that on a 7-inch single. What happened to it? You just wondered if maybe you gave it to somebody to listen to and you never got it back.
That's also likely. But yeah, carton boxes of vinyl records and NMEs was just backbreaking.
Yeah, especially when I lived in Edinburgh, you seem to move flat every 6 months.
Yes, the great. Oh, could you move now? You think,
yeah.
You got 2 months. Oh, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yes. So then photography, and then music still not really on your radar?
No, not playing music. In fact, I didn't, because I sold all my musical equipment, my guitars, my amps, whatever, to buy cameras.
Right.
Camera equipment and lighting equipment. So that's where that went. So I never even, I think I'd given away, I'd sold all my guitars, so I stopped playing. I think at one point I bought an acoustic guitar, but really didn't play it much. And then, did photography for about 10 years, and then I never really enjoyed it. It's one thing that probably should have been kept as a hobby. I didn't really like the industry I was in, nor a huge amount of nice people in it. And then I had this sort of, road to Damascus moment where I decided I was just going to do something completely different. Ended up going to train to be a nurse, which I am at the moment. That's my profession. And a few years ago, when I had my midlife crisis, I started buying guitars again and just couldn't stop, and ended up having about 7 guitars at one point.
My God, you are Nigel Tufnell.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah. So, but I managed to quell my appetite for that, and I think I'm down to about 4 guitars at the moment. Which, to be honest, I just pick them up every now and then. I think guitars are beautiful things to look at, and but I'll pick them up every so often and do a bit of noodling and come up with something and think, that sounds really good, and then put the guitar away. 2 weeks go by, I go back to it and think, what's that really good thing I had last time? And I can't remember.
Right, yeah. Yes. So then Optic Nerve put out this double B A side, didn't they?
Yeah, they did release the Meat Whiplash single, yeah.
And did that go well generally?
I think so. I think they pressed up 1,000 copies, and I think they probably sold them. Actually, the funny thing was, that nowadays there is so many different charts or download charts, and there was the 7-inch physical sales chart, and the Optic Nerve reissue was in, I can't remember what number it was, but it was one above Mark Bolan.
Right.
One. So there you go. At one point, I can say I was above Mark Molan in the charts.
Nice. And then Nick. So how do you get the Precious recording of London?
Nick had been, I think, had done the Jesse Garon and the Desperadoes Janice Long session.
Yeah.
And I think he'd been speaking to Andrew and had asked him about other sessions that he could maybe put out. And he said, Meat Whiplash did a session and the Motorcycle Boy did a session. So Nick contacted me about both. And I said, well, there's a record label in America called Silver Girl Records, and they were putting together a Meat Whiplash sort of compilation album.
Right.
So it was going to be stuff with the studio stuff, the John Peel session, and then he'd got some bands to re-record some of her songs, so it was like a double album. So that was just about to be released at that time, so I really wasn't a good time to release the Meat Whiplash session. So that's how we decided to just go ahead with the Motorcycle Boy one. Although he did say he might maybe do the Meat Whiplash one in the future.
Yes, God.
Because the packages Nick does are really, really nicely put together.
Oh, God, they're stunning. They are so beautifully done. So are you the main person who's behind?
Yeah, no, well, obviously with the Motorcycle Boy, well, Alex is dead, Eddie's dead. And even Anthony Cooper, the drummer, he died. He died of a heart attack. Pat Collier passed away not long ago. So it's just me and David. And David's based in America, so it's difficult for him to get too involved in things. So things just tend to come through me.
Right.
And a lot of people, like, for the Silver Girl stuff, they went through Cherry Red, and Cherry Red have my email address, so a lot of Meat Whiplash things come through me as well, just because Cherry Red have got my email address.
Yeah, and it's a stunning cover. I know this is coming out in August, isn't it, this year?
Yeah, the
Motorcycle Boy.
Yeah. I think maybe even the end of this month. Anyway, Nick, I got an email from Nick saying that the final's been delivered, so he sent me up some. So it shouldn't be too long before it's out. It's up. I know it's up for pre-sale anyway.
It is, and it's looking like it's gone really well actually. So the cover, it's beautiful, isn't it? It looks absolutely sexy and
it's a nice. Yeah, I don't have that many photographs left of the Motorcycle Boy, especially ones of all of us together that are professionally done. So that was done by a photographer. We had a whole, when we signed to Chrysalis, we had a photo session. It was all day, so there was outside shots in the morning, and in the afternoon we went into a studio and we did stuff. And that was one of the ones I was done down just outside the photographer's studio in Shoreditch. Steve Speller, the guy's name is, really good photographer.
Beautifully composed.
Yeah, he was good.
Amazing. God, this is fantastic. And then, so with this release, do you have any other musical plans or any more things on the horizon?
No, I think, both Meat Whiplash and the Motorcycle Boy are included in many, many compilations. So that tends to be where anything happens. It tends to be songs on compilation albums. Now, there's been talk about like a Jesse Garon and Desperadoes sort of compilation album that I think gets mooted every now and again, but nothing's ever happened with that. So stuff that I recorded with Jesse Garon would probably appear in that if it ever does appear.
Yeah, my God. So you did sleeve notes for this as well, and unseen images. Has it been quite a nice process going through this? And
Nick's easy to work with. He just sort of guides you and sort of things. Like he said, he lets you do the sleeve notes, and I did them. I sent to him, not knowing if it was the type of thing he wanted, but he said that's exactly the type of thing he wanted.
Yes,
because I think he said 400 words, and you think, well, that's a lot. But when you actually write it, 400 is not a lot of words to try to cram everything into.
No, it must be nice. I mean, this I know is again a bit, I don't know if it's Spinal Tap or not. Did you ever sort of visit, did you ever find out any more about Alex and what happened to her life in her later years?
No. Well, Saskia Hollins, who's done the book, there's a little bit in the book about actually how she died. But for her book, none of her family members wanted to be involved in it. So other than her husband contacted me to say that she'd actually passed away, and Saskia Hollins must have gotten copy of her death certificate, I'd imagine, because apparently she died in the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. So at that point, she must have. We'd heard that she'd moved back to Perth, where she was from originally, and her family were from. But maybe she did move back to Edinburgh, or perhaps she was just transferred from a hospital in Perth to a specialist unit at the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. So nobody knew, other than Andrew Tully meeting her up in 2003, and I don't think he got a huge amount of information from her, because Alice could be quite a private person.
Yes.
We never ever knew, until Saskia Holland's book came out. I never knew actually how old Alex was when we were in the band together, because she would never tell you.
Right.
And the thing is, she was only a year older than us, so it wasn't as if she was 10 years older. So yeah, she could be quite private.
Yes. Well, it's a nice, in a way, it's nice that this has come out, and her sort of vocals has been celebrated. And I noticed you're on Spotify as well, which I know.
Yeah. When I licensed the album from Blue Raincoat, they would only give it to me for the physical, for vinyl and CD. They keep the rights for streaming, because that's where most money is nowadays.
Right.
So, and I was quite, because I just wanted. It was one of those things that if I was on my deathbed and people were any regrets in life, my only regret would have been that the Motorcycle Boy album was never released.
Yes.
So it was like almost like a compunction that I had, that I had to get this album released if I could. That's why I kept tapping on the proverbial and figurative doors to try and find out where the master tapes were. So to be honest, it was like, it was a feeling of relief when I knew they were, but it was almost quite tearful as well when I found out what they were.
Yeah, well, I think that's what a lot of people suddenly, when they have that feeling of like, God, I haven't thought about this, and now I have. And this is something that I've created. I don't want it to get lost. And
exactly. And I think that was that there would be some permanent record of that time of the band.
Yeah.
And that was probably the only way really of doing it, because the Blue Raincoat digitised the tapes and then sent me it, and I did the rest. But I don't think they would have even got those songs digitised if it wasn't for me releasing the album.
Yes. So did you get to see the actual master tapes? Yeah.
No, they did that all down in London.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember there was a film about a band called Rima, and and they sort of like, it's just like, God, these are the tapes, and it was like, there's something quite magical, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah.
And the fact that you hear occasionally some fire or some disaster, and it's like, oh, they've gone and potentially lost lots of stuff, and you think, my God, but you never know, do you?
Yeah, warehouses that go on fire.
So, it's brilliant. It's a great story, and so it's pleasing that you've managed to sort of, just get the release out and interest as well. Because I noticed that the streaming sort of does get a lot of plays, actually, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems to do okay.
And with all these interests and like I said, those documentaries and compilations, people get happily surprised, really.
Yeah, because me and David were talking about this, and David Scott from the What's It Go, we were talking this a while ago, but do we say people want interviews or whatever? Do we say no to some things? And both of us just felt the same way. Look, people want to put the time and effort, and it must mean something to them. If they're going to put the time and effort in, then we just let them.
Yeah.
The level of involvement we have in it might vary, but just let them do it.
Yes. Well, thank you for your time.
That's right.
Yes, this has been amazing. I'll keep in touch and send Nick a link to the interview and stuff. But I'm sure this is going to be a good one, actually, because it looks like most of them have been sold on the physical copies. So, yes, it's good, isn't it? I think the brand is very good, actually. So, hurrah for Nick.
Yeah, exactly. He seems to be a really decent guy. Anybody that's doing that just out of... Because obviously, like you say, he's not going to have... It's not his pension that he's building up. He's just doing it for the love of it.
Yes, I know.
It's a fantastic thing.
Yes, this is true. Well, look, thank you ever so much for your time. It's really amazing.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
It's good. Well, yes, it's always interesting to hear these pop... And I must, like I said, when you mentioned Saskia, I'd forgotten... There was a booking, I think it was a band from the Medway scene she'd done, which I'd interviewed her about. I can't remember. And now this new one, so I must get in touch with her.
Yeah. It's a good book, actually. I've not finished it yet, but it goes into quite a lot of depth. And it's well written as well.
Yeah. Anyway, people are so keen. Anyway, thanks for your time. Have a lovely evening.
Okay.
And take care, and I'll say goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. You probably gathered that. Anyway, massive thank you to Michael Kerr for giving me the time for that interview, talking about his life in music with various bands, including the Motorcycle Boy with their John Peel session that is coming out on the Precious Recordings of London. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on all those social media platform sites, and also all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes and Podbeam. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.